and this is a special workshop to discuss the floodplain ordinance. For those of you who, for all of you who consented to have this, I think it's in the best interest of our city that we come to some conclusion about what we want to do. We have a meeting next week, and if we can come get things hashed out and give it to Nick in a form that we can get it ready, then we can move forward with it. Everyone's aware we voted to rescind the 500-year floodplain. I think it's time that we define in as simple terms as possible what we want to do and where we want to go with it. So that's what this is about. This is a non-voting meeting. It is simply a discussion of what we want to do, and I didn't turn the phone off.
Darryl, we got your,
I have started
Good.
this meeting. But I'll take care of that. I have a new phone and I don't know how to operate it.
I noticed you got out of flip. You really.
Well, I got chastised to the point that it was,
I was Harry won't get
and I
it.
really don't know how, I think you pushed that.
I think
Y'all had to
that-
turn it off.
Side,
Okay.
right side.
You
Oh,
gotta
yeah.
push, you gotta hold two buttons.
You gotta hold the two sides at the same
Those
time.
two little buttons.
That,
No,
and
one
then the
side at a
opposite
time.
side, the one on the bottom and then the one on the opposite side, hold them both at the same
How about if
time.
I just put the commas off?
Yeah, give me that turn on.
The hell no.
He's going to get some
You get it turned
Facebook
off, we're gonna get it turned
suggestions
back on.
because it's live.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, the more important thing. So I think, I sent in, when I sent that little email about asking for a workshop, I sort of summed up what I thought was the important things to me. Now let's open the floors. No order, just, or Nick, do you have any, I mean, we've seen what you marked up based on what we talked about,
I'll
back in
just give
September.
two preliminary comments that might head off some confusion. The format in the document you have is a little strange because this is a floodplain ordinance that we've changed a couple of times recently. In the parts that are the building code sections, those are where it's strange because what we've done in the past is we've shown what we've changed in the building code so that any contractor would know right away, okay, this is different, I've got to pay attention to this. So in the document you have, there are changes shown that already happened last year, and then there are highlighted changes which are what we would be changing now. So it is a little confusing, like you might see a number, a 2.0 or 1.5, that's old and underlined, so it's like, oh, that's the new stuff. That's only the new stuff if it's highlighted in yellow. The other preliminary comment, Gina and I just got together on this. I think we've got one instance where we accidentally left in through about 2 or 3 layers deep of definitions. We may have left in that 500-year height. We'll get rid of that. That's in design flood elevation, the definition there. That's not intentional, but it does look like we probably
Just overlook that one,
uh,
because it does reference that. Okay. All right,
And the part you, excuse me.
Yeah, no.
I don't, you know, I'm trying to say, what you trying to say about the elevation, that was on 19, is that on the page, that's on the line, is that the main, that's what you said?
it's in the definitions.
It's on page 4.
When you look at,
the one where it didn't get changed, it still references
Oh,
500 years.
okay, well, you said we're gonna get rid of that, but what you was talking about before, about the elevations, about the, that was on 19, right?
That's
the main thing we're looking at here,
yeah, the first thing I was talking about is in some.
page
of the
19.
The pages, yes, 19's one of them, 20.
Yes, okay,
Just the
that's,
format.
okay.
I'll clarify what I was talking about on the design flood elevation. On page 4, which is your definition, there is a definition for design flood. And it says the flood associated with the greater of the following 2 areas, and it gives an A and a B. Well, A is straightforward, it's the 1% flood area, that's fine. B is where I think we area designated as flood hazard area on the community's flood hazard map or otherwise legally designated. Well, we're still keeping the 500-year shaded X areas as flood hazard areas. And I think what we probably did here is we incorporated that 500-year level for design flood, and design flood is used later on some of the rules about how high you can build. So we'll fix this definition to get rid of that 500-year reliance. We'll clear that up, and we'll run it through the state, and we'll tell them what we're intending to do and make sure that they agree that we've accomplished it.
So,
We'll do something to be on that design flood.
design flood elevation, I don't see anything that says 500-year in there.
And that's why we missed it initially. It just says flood hazard area, and
You
and
gotta designate what it is and what isn't.
right now, at least the way we've got this set up, the 500-year area, which is the shaded X area, we've gotten them included as flood hazard areas, but not for determining how high you build. There are flood hazard area definitions for things like whether you need to have limits on the amount of fill you can put in. It's other rules. It's not the height of the building, but we've intentionally left the shaded X as flood hazard area. And because of that, we've probably on design flood accidentally used that 500-year level on some of the rules later. But like I said, we'll either delete B or if change B, we'll ensure that we don't carry that 500-year level through for elevations.
So I think, Jerry, on page 19,
Yeah, that's true.
were the areas
Yes.
where we changed, that I think all of that, that's in yellow.
Yellow's the new stuff.
Is the new.
New stuff.
And then you'll notice, like, on number, R 322.2.1, under the second paragraph, starts by saying in shallow flooding, AO zones. As you read down, you'll see how there's some text that's highlighted and some text that's just bold and underlined. And if it's bold and underlined, that means we adopted that last year. If it's highlighted, that's showing what it is we're thinking about changing now.
And in millimeters, you just thought, I guess that's what that is. Did we just, instead, where you, like in that paragraph, it says 2 feet, 610 millimeters?
Right, yeah.
Why did we put, I mean, we added the millimeters?
I just did a calculation of what 4 feet would be and, let's see. Yeah, for instance, we changed 2 feet, we changed 1 foot to 2 feet. And it used to say 305 millimeters, and that's just what's in the floor.
Oh, okay.
So I doubled it
That's the format that was
because
used before. Okay.
Normally I wouldn't include millimeters, but that's what's in the floor building code. So
Okay.
I just doubled it since we have 2 feet instead of 1 feet.
That's for the AO zone and the A zone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We didn't put in the millimeter measurement before, we only said the number of feet.
Feet, correct.
And I must have just added it in because it looked like it was matching the format of what the floor building code has, but that could probably be eliminated in one night.
The millimeters.
Well, my question to Gina, being she's here, or to anybody, on that section, just take that, the one we're talking about, paragraph 2 there, in the AO zone. How do you interpret in the AO zone the elevation of a house?
Well, first thing about the AO zones is I don't think we have any in scenic
Okay,
What?
So,
I didn't either, that's why I was,
I'm almost, if there's one, I hadn't seen it yet.
okay.
So,
Say that again, I'm sorry.
we don't have any AO flood
Okay.
zones in this code. We have undesignated A, and we have AE, but
Okay, well, that's, I was trying to think of the different zones that I don't remember ever seeing in AO. we have it in there because it is a FEMA recognized zone in other areas.
Yeah, and we could have.
And we could have one down
You
the
know,
road.
there might be a little tiny one somewhere that'll pop up that I just
Okay.
hadn't seen, so it could be there. But I haven't seen one yet. But I guess to answer your question, you know, based on this definitions, it would be 2 feet above highest adjacent grade would be the,
And that adjacent grade could be road, surrounding lots, whatever.
highest adjacent grade would be the highest grade on the parcel of land, not
Okay.
roads or anything else. Now, how do we determine that? That's gonna be based on survey that they provide, and we.
So, say for instance, down at the beach, I just worked on a house next door, they got some dunes that are 5 feet tall. So, in that dune, that just happens to be a freak little dune, they'd have to go 2 feet above that 5-foot dune.
Well, it is coastal plain, coastline, construction line.
I'm not really sure where that is, it's Jason and Holly Al's house on 39.
Oh, yeah, they're sewer and CCCL, so their elevation would be,
Well, looks like they got a CCL line that's outside of there, closer to the beach.
Jason Al's,
Uh-huh.
at the end of,
39. There's a row of stakes down through there that are designating CCI.
the end of 39th, there's definitely sewer and CCCL.
How far up 39 does that go probably?
Probably 3 or 4 lots.
So
that
that
would
comes out
affect
as,
them anyway.
Yeah,
Meaning CCL line is all DEP regulated.
right.
and we have to do what it doesn't matter what we say, we have to do what they say.
Right.
Right, yeah, that's regulated by the state through DEP and also through the Florida Building Code.
Yeah, okay. Did you have anything else? you
No,
wanted to say?
I'm just waiting on whoever wants to.
Okay, so, after the other meeting, when we voted to, make the, floodplain 1.5 foot above the crown of the road, I did 2 things. First, just I get it out of the way, cause it's a pretty interesting fact, and I think that, when Sally happened and we had all the 20 inches of rain and whatever, really showed us, true flood, not storm surge and whatever, true flooding. I mean, we got a big rain event. Everybody knows how much rain it was going out of 8th Street Canal like the, Colorado. So anyhow, I went around and I kinda got a count of houses, and I didn't count all of them, but I counted most of the ones that are in my area over there where most of the flooding from Sally happens. You know, when it's low over there, you know, it flooded around Bubba Harm and all that, you know, the little trailer park and all that. Anyhow, I counted all those, all the way up to Hatley, all the way up to 386, all the way to the end of our city. And from there back all the way to, 7th Street. Now, I didn't count some of the ones right up on the beach, because some of the ones right up on the beach are in X and whatever, and it's really kind of irrelevant. But anyhow, I went around and drove up and down the roads and made a count of 486 houses. Now, this is just an interesting point. Out of those 486 houses, 343 of them were below the crown of the road, or at least below 1.5 foot below the crown of the road. And if it was close, I gave them the benefit of the doubt and said they're above. 143 were above. Interesting fact about the 143 above, the majority of those were actually mobile homes and manufactured homes, because they always get set up higher. So there's a lot less chance of those type homes, and everybody thinks those are the ones that are gonna flood, but they were mostly up high. There's almost no chance that those would have ever got any of Sally water in them. The ones that were getting Sally water in them were slab houses and whatever, so. But anyhow, an interesting thing, when we designated 1.5 feet above the ground of the road, I didn't see any houses anywhere that would have any chance of having water in the house. They would have water in the yard, but they wouldn't have water in the house if they had all built to the 1.5 feet above the ground of the road. Does that make sense? You're looking at me like it don't
I'm
make sense.
listening.
Okay, that's just an interesting point that I, it made me feel better about our decision, that it was a good decision. All right, the other thing that I did, which was the most important thing that I did, was I got Gina to meet with me, and we talked about, let me give just because, I have talked to Gina a lot about this. Gina has told me, and she reminds me on occasion, that she has no opinion about which it should be, and she's not telling me how she thinks it should be. She just wants us to come to an agreement, and then she can enforce whatever we come to an agreement, that's her job, and she's really good at doing it. She does a great job, and so my opinions have nothing to do with her opinions, other than she educated me on some of the issues. And I said, okay, so what is in the classification, the Shaded X classification? I said, what are the things that we need to take into consideration? And please correct me if I get off on this, but these are the notes that I made. We had some questions. Bobby had a question earlier about the ICC, the increased cost of compliance for these people to build up. Were they going to get their insurance money? I spoke with Andy of Hannon Insurance. I've already told you guys this, and he said, in his opinion, it's not going to affect him at all, because if they've gone up based on regulations that were in place before we change them, he didn't see how any insurance could not honor paying that difference. They're still going to get that through their insurance policy in most instances. It doesn't have to be in a classification. All right, there was the issue of having to have a permit to fill your lot, and you can only fill it by 1 foot, and that's Florida Building Code, is that correct?
No, that's in your floodplain.
Okay, so that's in the floodplain, all right, so you can only fill 1 foot, and the reasoning that you don't want to allow them to fill over a foot is the area that they are filling takes away from the volume of the flood plain. So in other words, the total amount of volume that floodplain can hold, you're taking away from that. So if you go above a foot, then you're taking away unnecessary volume out of the floodplain, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Which I think is a good thing. I don't think they should be able to put in more than a foot. You need an elevation certificate in this classification. An elevation certificate, you need, you gotta do a benchmark elevation certificate, and that's just extra work for people to do, extra slowing them down for them to be able to get their jobs done, to prove that you're at what elevation you are. I asked Gina how she did the X zone, because X zone is not required to get those, correct?
Correct.
Because X zone is X zone. So I said, well, how do you know that they're a foot above the crown of the road? She says, well, I take my laser and I shoot the road and I shoot the house, and I know whether they're a foot above or not. I said, well, so in essence, could you not do that to any of the other ones to kind of get an idea if they're 1.5 feet above the crown of the road? And I think she said, yes, I could do that probably.
Yes, but not currently, because currently they require an elevation certificate.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it weren't for that, and we needed to know that they could comply with our foot above, if we did away with that particular classification requirement, then it would be a relatively easy thing to do.
Yes, but you're not gonna know exactly. You're never
Right.
gonna know that they're exactly 1.5 feet above.
But you're
just
gonna,
like you don't in X. It's
right,
a,
but you're gonna know if you're an inch or, within an inch or two, more than likely.
probably more like 4 inches.
Okay, so-
I mean,
I have more-
it's not an exact science
I
out
know,
there.
but I have more faith in you with your laser than 4 inches.
GPS accuracy versus a surveyor accuracy.
Yeah.
Well, not even, I mean, I'm literally out there with a laser, I mean, we can be done with a GPS, and that would be even more accurate. What I'm doing is not even GPS accuracy.
She's shooting a laser line and probably somebody,
Measuring up a foot off the crown of the road and shooting a laser
right,
to the finished floor, so that's
that's,
not very accurate,
well,
that's what I'm saying.
as a builder, that's pretty accurate. We do laser stuff a lot. It's, as long as you
It's
make
not
sure you're
survey,
holding it up.
it's not
No.
survey grade, by
Correct.
any means.
No, I'm not saying it is. Okay, so anyhow, that's a thing. There is still a need to elevate the garage, bathrooms, put flood vents in, do, that on, say, a garage or whatever, and you gotta have all of this stuff to do that as well. So, those were the major things that are in there, and so, what I'm saying, you know, we really, this is just, we're so over-regulating what we're doing by this classification. We've already dropped the elevation to 1.5 feet above the crown of the road. Well, what do we need all this other stuff for? I went and talked to Zach Childs yesterday to get his perspective as a realtor as to what people are saying about, was the sales picking up because we dropped the classification down to 1.5 feet? He said, yes. He said, everybody likes that. It's generated some more interest. He said, but here's what, he said, a funny thing is he said, there's quite a few people that are mad. And I said, well, what are they mad about? He said, well, they're mad because we did this to begin with. And he said, I said, well, I'm sorry, I hope they're not mad at me, I didn't do anything. And I said, I hope that they understand that under the circumstances, nobody did anything that they thought was, there was nothing done malicious and nothing done without careful thought and time put into it. But he said, here's what I think, in my opinion, I think we should do away with the shaded X classification and go back to where we were, the 1.5 feet. He said, I don't have a problem with 1.5 feet, I think that's a good thing. So, from his perspective, he thinks it would make the city build faster, be easier for people to come here and make them have a better feeling about coming here to build without that classification and all the crap. I mean, you can see that it's just loaded with all this stuff, you know. That makes it hard to understand where you're at. So, and it's a lot to study. It's brutal.
Okay? Anybody else?
In this one right here, it's more quick, this is very easy to read, and everybody knows. And don't feel bad when the lady tells you that's her opinion, and not, she tells me that regularly. So it's not nothing against you, she tells me now, Jim, and I know I done, this is not her.
Yeah, well,
Where does it have it in? I know I don't read it, so my eyes are crossed. But where does it say, saying this about you have to get the, survey, elevation chart? Where does it say in this at? And just what I got behind me. You tell me, Nick,
I'm looking.
Gina, Al. Where
Yeah, I read it, it does require elevation certificate.
It does.
I don't know where that is.
I either missed it or overlooked it or read too fast or didn't think it was in that paragraph and didn't read it. I thought it'd be in the site plans and construction documents, but I didn't, not unless I overlooked it again. Somebody. I was just going by what Darrell said about what he'd like to do is take it away, but I didn't ever see it here, so.
You know, it's the end of page 15,
15.
is that right? Maybe
Well, I got 13, I didn't go for it.
lowest floor inspection and final inspection. I'm not sure that's the right spot. It looks like you get
I thought that was when the main inspection,
Yep,
they
that's-
showed that you,
Lowest floor inspection.
So page 15, D,
is that,
Well,
the bottom D. Lowest floor
The
inspection.
certificate of elevation is on D one.
what is that?
Yeah, if a design flood elevation was used to determine the required elevation of the lowest floor, certification of elevation of the lowest floor, prepared and sealed by a Florida licensed professional surveyor.
What does that mean when it says if a design flood elevation was used?
The design flood elevation, and that goes back to that definition Nick was talking about earlier, it's the base flood elevation plus a foot and a half.
Okay.
So right now, everywhere shaded X, all the flood zones except X, you're using
Right.
a design flood elevation, which is why we need a elevation certificate.
Okay, gotcha.
But now, if we changing the elevation and doing away with the classification, so to speak, then we wouldn't need any of that stuff. All we need to know is foot and a half above ground road, correct, just like an X?
Correct, yeah, if you
And it
take,
would make it way easier, a lot less, even though you can't get closer than 4 inches. Make it a lot less people involved, a lot less regulation to it, a lot less cost involved with getting something for
Yes.
people.
it would be less cost, less documents,
Less work on you even,
probably more work on me.
just because of the way we do it.
Well, because of Mario and I have had this conversation in the past, that there will come a time where we get lots of arguments about what is the elevation of the crown of the road exactly, and what is a foot and a half above that. And is that elevation of the crown of the road on this, the east side of your property or the west side? Because there might be a 2-foot drop.
I thought that was handled by whichever way you access it through your driveway.
It is, but there still could be a drop across your site.
It can be defined as the highest point from property line to property line at the crown of the road, so if you're on a sloped road, it's gonna be up here. Versus, this is where the argument came in a building over in Panama City Beach. There was a ramp that led up to Highway 98, and within the right of way, it was literally an extra 2 feet higher, and it was measured from that point. So again, if we're gonna say the crown of the road, it would really behoove us to define the crown of the road to be the highest point within the right of way and within the limits of the property lines. And then again, if it's a corner lot, it's still the highest point of whatever that road is, so.
No matter which way you drive.
Do we want it to be the highest point, or do you want it to be the median of the highest point? If there's, it's a definition, so we need to define it, because
Yeah.
somebody that wants to build their house lower is gonna say the point of the road is the lowest point of the road. Somebody that wants to push it to the highest point is gonna push it to the highest. Somebody in between is gonna say to the medium. She's gonna have to measure 3 times if we're talking about the median, 1 time if it's the highest, and once if it's the lowest, so it's up to y'all.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be,
What is your recommendation that we make them do?
clearly define what you would like them to do.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
in our email, that's why I put in there, that was a critical point about when you're gonna use the crown of the road, that the highest point, to me, has got to be defined as the highest point from property line to property line, regardless if it's a corner lot or not.
Yeah,
If it is, it includes
More road.
includes more roadway.
yeah.
But it's gotta be that is the highest point of any access to that property from a roadway.
Well, I think you'd have to take the highest point of the road because you're defeating the purpose if you're using, you go
Well,
around the corner and the road.
You're
falls
exactly
off.
right, but I think that would be done. If if we don't define it.
Yeah, but if we define it as the highest, that makes it easier for her to,
Well, I would think it would be. I
Yes.
think that would say, hey,
Yeah,
yeah, regardless, if it's
and then they
1
have
foot in on the property line, or if it's in the middle, it doesn't matter where it is.
the highest,
Right.
and then, but then they still have to prove that.
yeah.
I mean, so they'll have to show what that highest point is, and where it's taken.
Do you know the cost of getting the elevation certificate?
I don't,
I talked to
Any
her.
idea?
yeah, I mean, $500, something like
Well, that'd be
between,
cheaper than that.
but then, it's the front end and the back end, so it's, you gotta get elevation of the ground on the front end, and then elevation certificate on the back end, so it's two different documents. So,
What do you need? Don't you need one if you're gonna build anyway?
you don't have to have an elevation certificate, in order to do it.
But don't you need the knowledge?
Yes, and if we talk about highest point on the crown of the road, they're still gonna have to get something on the front end that shows that, so that's not gonna go away. The back end elevation certificate would go away. So you'd really be eliminating one step in the end process.
And you're also making it so that it can be done informally with a laser instead of hiring a surveyor,
Correct.
as long as it looks fair to the building department, that'll be acceptable.
Yeah. But they'd still have to get that surveyor on the front end to determine the highest.
Well, I've built houses a long time, and any builder that doesn't have a builder's level, you don't get, most call them transits, they're not transits. But you set up, most builders have them, and so they can do a shot and give you an affidavit letter, or a letter in their letterhead saying, I've shot the highest part of the road out there on lot 7, on wherever, and the highest road elevation I found is so-and-so. I mean, would that work for you? And then you could, of course, if it didn't look right, you would know that when you went out there probably. You shot an elevation off of it, because you're gonna have to come a foot and a half above that highest point that they designate.
Right, but now keep in mind, they don't call me until they're finished.
Yeah.
So by the time I get out there, it's too late.
Still,
Well,
If
then
we
what-
could require them to call in an inspection before they, an elevation inspection before they pour the foundation, or as they're,
I'm surprised that that's not required anyhow, because gee whiz. It's not required,
No,
huh?
it's not required. No. I mean, there's an inspection for, a foundation, footer inspection, but that's rebar and,
Right. And then typically, unless it's a monolithic core, which is all poured at the same time, is that any different, a monolithic core, the footing is totally different, because they can build a stem wall on it or whatever they're gonna do.
yeah, but, I mean, we're not called out to do any kind of setback inspection or elevation inspection until the very end of the job.
Yeah, which is why sometimes they get in trouble.
Right.
they leave it to the contractor, that's the objective, yeah.
Right.
That's what-
We can't leave it up to the country. We can't do that.
I agree with that. I think we
That's,
need,
we gotta control our city. I don't want to rely on a contractor
Well, I
to
mean,
tell us that. And you just said that y'all don't look at the setbacks prior to the construction of the house?
Prior to the construction, yes, on the front end, on all the documentation, but we don't physically go out there and say, yeah, you've laid out the site correctly and you can proceed with your foundation. We don't
Okay.
have a setback inspection
All right,
prior to construction.
I don't wanna get off, I don't wanna get away from this,
Yeah.
that's another set. Okay,
that's something we need to address it. I think we need to.
yeah, we used to. We used to go out there and measure the strings and pull and see that prior to them, when the battle boards were up or whatever they had, if they had the corner stake or whatever, we used to do that. Oh, yeah.
I remember behind the Sandy Yarborough house,
Yes, sir.
that place that was built right there,
Yeah.
they had to go measure.
I mean, whose fault is it if it's wrong? Once it's built,
Contractor.
Either the contractor or the surveyor
I
that
know.
staked it out.
the house is built, so what's the practical,
What
I
you
mean,
gonna do,
what
tear it
what do you do then?
Well, we got one right now that just came before the planning and zoning last night, trying to get variance.
Of course, that's their only option, the house is built, they got, they can't, what are they gonna do?
Well, I mean,
But anyway,
Yeah, let's just.
let's save that subject for another time and back to,
The next meeting, probably.
well, it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like that's gonna come up, but, anybody else? Well, look, I got a couple comments, and I wanna say this with respect to every property owner in this city. But for several months now, I have listened to those that have come before us, either physically in this room, with multiple emails about this floodplain ordinance, and personal conversations. And the overwhelming majority of those people, this is not their real city. This is not their real home. I own a real home. I don't have an investment home, I don't have a vacation home, I don't have a second home, I don't have a rental home. And I respect everyone that owns property. But I don't wanna build my house, or my business, or my neighborhood, or my city to the bare minimum standards because it saves somebody else some money. Or it expedites them building something quicker. And I've said this to some of them, because they're sleeping in a home. If my home's destroyed, I don't have a place to go. So when we're talking about the issue that we're talking about here, I want to build our city to a standard that is what's best for our city and not someone else's pocketbook. I'm not willing to want to do that. So when people tell me, well, look what it's going to cost me to build this house. Well, it's going to cost me the same, but those are standards that I think are important for our city. Because it's where I live, and it's where I make a living. And I respect them in what they come here and invest in our town, but I don't want to set our standards for their benefit. Because the people that I've talked to, that this is their home, they don't mind paying to have what they think is best for their house, for their real home, not their second home or their vacation home. So one of the reasons that I put in my email, or one of the things that I support keeping the shaded X. I support keeping that map just like it is. And simply using the shaded X area. I don't disagree with Darrell that there are areas within that shaded X that some could argue they'll never flood. But there's also many areas in there that are susceptible to flooding, and if we're gonna build our city back after Michael, I'm okay with setting some standards that give us the most protection that is reasonable. I think the 500, I voted for the 500 year because, or to rescind it because I think it's excessive. I think 2 foot above the town of the road and shaded X is a very simple change. It's easy to administer if we define the crown of the road. But leave the map like it is. It's too susceptible. The Gulf of Mexico and water coming over the highway isn't the major, that is truly a 500-year event. But we do have those canals that open ourselves up to that back flooding in the north side of our city. And I just think to get rid of the 500-year and go to something that is so easily administered is the simplest way to give our people a good understanding. And I know that some could say, well, it's just 6 inches. You're arguing over But in rising water, from 1.5 to 2 feet, in rising water, that's a significant difference, especially for the south side shaded X properties. So, I wanna keep it simple. I wanna keep the administration of this floodplain simple. And if you do that, it still saves our people, anyone building, a significant amount of money because of the lower elevations compared to the 500 year. If you look on the map and it's the shaded X area, Gina or whoever's sitting over there says, okay, that requires X amount above the crown of the road. You define what the crown of the road is, where you're gonna shoot it from, and you move on. I mean, am I oversimplifying where the dilemma comes in terms of the administration of it? You don't change any other category. X has always been a foot above the crown of the road. It stays above the foot of the crown of the road. That doesn't change. The other AE, the ones we have the most of, AE and BE,
Yeah.
are already administered. I mean, they're already covered, how you deal with it. And then we have to address how you're gonna change, whatever the foot change is, you have to decide what we're gonna do for those that wanna build to the 500 year versus somebody, once this is changed, that the required elevation then comes from the 100-year floodplain. Well, they can't build as high as the guy that we're gonna build for the 500 years, because you measure from different heights. So you got a townhouse that's built now, owner A, then you got owner B who wants to match him. We gotta make some allowance that he can build that high. Or he's gonna run out of room and he can't match the height of the one that built to the 500 year.
That's right. He loses buildable height.
He's gonna lose buildable height if we go back to the 100 year plus X above the crown of the road in shaded X. If we do that, because the required height, when you start measuring, or the required mark on the pole for building height starts at the required height. Well, the required height now is gonna be 100-year floodplain plus either 1.5 or 2 feet above the crown of the road. Well, when the 500-year guy built, the required height was, it may have been 7 feet.
Right.
So, if he comes in after he's built, we're gonna have to give him the latitude to, I guess, I don't really know how you would word that, but we've got to somehow allow for those who choose to build to the 500 year, that they be allowed to, that their building mark for 32 feet start at the 500 year.
You're talking about somebody who would want to elevate their house, put cars under it, but isn't required to.
That's
You wanna
right.
make sure they can do
That's
that.
right.
But they're building it to the 500 year, not just because they wanted to build it up higher. So keep in mind, there are homes on the waterfront that are built higher than the 500 year because they were at 8 feet, and if they got to 9 feet, they could get the boat underneath it. So there is still some choice component, but that 0 mark to start your 32 feet is what the code requires you to do.
Yeah. So see, they would lose. The required height now is gonna be 100-year floodplain plus whatever we decide. And the people who've already built, that built it to 500 year, they had a different starting point.
Correct.
So, for me, that's why I think that the shaded X is important. I think it has value to our city, and I just would like to keep it as simple as we can, and yet give people, I hate to use the word break, but give them a more reasonable floodplain ordinance. But I'm certainly not in favor of changing the classifications that are made, that's on the FEMA map. I think that is, I'm not for that.
Is there a footage difference in, referring to what Al's speaking to, starting at the 100 to the 500 year in loss of elevation? Is there a, how variable is that amount of feet, depending on where you're at and what flood zone you're
Yeah,
in?
it can be 5 feet, it could be a foot, it could be anywhere from a foot and a half to, what do we have on that map? Some places 6.5 feet. So it depends on where you are and what the situation is.
And the areas
Water
that
is
it's,
gone.
Yeah.
Oh, there, there, there.
The largest that you have here is 6 feet.
okay, and so, you just pointed to the largest is 6 feet?
One
This end.
right here at 6 feet and one right there at 6 feet.
Okay,
And again, this is in an A zone and that one is in a
right.
shaded X.
So that's essentially where, Mike Guy's building his house, I think. That's on that, across the house, across the road from the little houses, what we've all called the little houses, essentially.
That would be correct, that's
Yeah.
in Paradise Road,
Okay, and then up here around
that's the canal.
the canal, okay. Well. I don't know, is that not something that we could do with a variance if somebody got into that situation now?
A variance will
A
be.
variance to allow them to build up to that if they wanted to do the 500-year floodplain? Because, you know, what my thought has been all along is, look, let's take these required elevations away from people, but any of those people that wanna build up, they certainly can build up, but what I wanted to do was to not make them build up if they didn't wanna build up. And so, if they do wanna
I
build
don't
up.
want, I don't wanna make them either. I just wanna make it where that if they do choose to,
Mhm.
they don't get penalized in the height of the building.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't really know, we have a good, I mean, I don't know how many people that's gonna be, I mean,
Percentage of the house, what I was gonna ask from you guys.
are you having a lot of requests for that?
We've got probably 4 people that have submitted building permits because they think this is gonna happen and they
Okay.
wanna get in the system before it does.
Okay,
I've talked to Lance at SCE, and they've got probably 6 people just sitting and waiting, not knowing what to do, whether they start redesigning their house or not. You know, that's what, a dozen
and so
so far.
it's based on, they're gonna, if we're gonna change it, they're gonna go ahead and get a permit before we get it changed and in effect, so.
Or they won't get a permit because their plans aren't ready, but they'll at least be in the system.
And if they're in the system, then they get to build up to that.
I mean, that's up to you guys, but that's kind of what I've been saying, at least if you're in the system, you have some kind of a fighting chance to say that you've submitted before the rules are changed, I mean,
That's normal. If
Yeah.
an application's in and we have had a very clear statement that we're putting those applications on hold and we're, applying new rules, that's normal.
yeah.
So would it be an issue for us to allow those people to build up to that height in those instances? I mean, how big of an instance would an issue would that be, Nick, for us to say, well, yeah, if you're gonna build to the 500, then you can go to that, you can use that.
Well, if we're talking about the 4 people that are working on applying now, they'll get their applications in before these rules are changed. It's gonna take a couple steps, so they'll accomplish what they're trying to do. If you're talking about some hypothetical, another 10, 15 people out there, we would just need to design the rules around that to allow it. I wouldn't wanna use a variance process for that, especially if we.
How would you go about designing the rule to do that?
Well, the rules about maximum height of your building, not
Mhm.
the flood rules, but the roof height, they're in a different part of the land development code, and we would tinker with those rules and allow additional height for people that were, building based on 500-year levels, and that wouldn't have to go through the state. The state doesn't care how tall the houses are, they care where the floor is, not where the roof is.
So, explain why we've got a height regulation anyhow. I mean, I understand why we do, but give me a brief description. We can only build up to what height here?
The the maximum height anywhere in the city is 48 feet, and that's a little deceptive because you have to know exactly where the bottom is. But once you figure out where the bottom is, 48 feet is the maximum. Most areas are 32, I think.
Yeah.
And the background on that is just, I've seen it in action. The councils that I've worked with did not want tall hotels, big businesses. They didn't want houses that were just towering over things. And it's just, especially and we have so many properties in the city that are 20 feet wide. If they're 60 feet tall, 20 feet wide, you got an interesting dynamic there. But that's up to the council, and that could be changed, but that's always been the.
But that's something we can do outside of the flood issue.
Right, the flood rules are
Do what
basically where
outside?
the floor is.
The height requirement
We're not
issue
gonna
that you
change
were saying.
that.
We don't wanna change the height
I'm
requirement.
not saying to go up, what I'm saying is allowing them to go up to what their neighbor may be, is what you brought up.
Well, I just brought up that, now that the, sort of the horse is out of the barn on the 500-year, some of those buildings now that are built to that. Townhomes especially, where they built one and the next one wants to match up to him. If we change it and he gets required to build at the 100-year,
We can write a rule that would
he
allow
can't do
that,
that.
but I think we should keep it out of the floodplain rules.
So we could write a
Put it in our
rule,
Building height rules.
it'd be a fairly simple process of writing a rule to allow those specific kinds of cases to match up to their neighbor.
We could figure out something.
Well,
And
not
it-
those cases, excuse me, but anyone that chooses to build to the 500-year floodplain.
Right, and it would be to
That
make
might-
it simpler for folks if they want to have, what we're really talking about is parking in their house. It gives them a better opportunity to do that because it's not gonna always count against their maximum height.
Right, okay.
Right.
But we could handle that outside the flood.
Right. Floodplain rules are about where the floor is. We're now talking about where the top of the building is.
And we don't know how many we're gonna have, but it looks like right now a dozen. I've had interest.
We have no idea how many.
Yeah, so, but we can handle it outside of what we design.
It would be simpler to do it that way.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the state is nervous when you change rules in the model code that they want to have the same everywhere. They don't care what we do about our building heights. Our building heights are already pretty low, so you add a little bit here and there, the state doesn't care.
Well, I think, some of the stuff Al spoke to that I totally agree with, of trying to keep the character of Mexico Beach as much as we can, like it has been for years, and of course, that's changing slowly, and you can't stop that, but, I don't want this to be Destin and all those really tall buildings and all that stuff, so, anyhow.
Well, that can be addressed in separate from this, because you're right, it's not addressed in the floodplain ordinance, the height.
And in
It's
fact,
just,
right, but actually, as I'm thinking through it, a lot of those heights are also stated in comprehensive plan, so we'd have to change those as well, but again, the state's not gonna mind if you allow somebody an extra 10 feet, they just won't care.
Okay. Good.
okay, good, I didn't think about it till you said that, this deals with the bottom of the house. I never thought of it, but you're right, and nowhere in here addresses
No.
the height of the building. So, let's get back to, am I the only one that is interested in it being 2 feet above the crown of the road? For shaded edge?
I'm happy with a foot and a half.
Well, I think we're doing a lot by changing to the 100-year plan. I think we need to keep shade nets, and I'm not against the foot and a half, I'm not against the 2. I think we need to keep the shade nets, and I think we need to make sure that whatever height requirement, not height, but elevation requirement is kept. Only because, not only because of the person building, the person beside it. It all needs to stay the same. We gotta look out for everybody, not just somebody that wants to build cheap.
Well, me personally, I think we've pretty much handled the issue. Again, when I rode around and I looked at how many were just so I mean, dead even with the road or below the road. Those are the ones that get flooded. In a true flood, I mean, we're not talking about storm surge or wave action or any of that kind of junk for those houses back there. But by doing the 1.5 feet, we've eliminated, I don't know of any place that would not be out of the water, so to speak, by going up 1.5 feet. I mean, and granted, whatever change we make, there's still a bunch of houses back there that on the Sally are gonna have water in their house, cause we're not making them build their house up. They're in their house, and until somebody builds it down and tries to meet the new code, they're gonna be below the road. But,
Yeah, that has to be handled by storm. About the best we can do is stormwater drainage and help them
Right.
out. We can't change, and
Right.
in some cases, we can't help them no matter what we do.
right, exactly. And we do have, you know,
We just,
I really wanna work on the storm drainage. I don't know what you can do. I try to tell everybody that I work for, look, Florida's level, essentially. Water don't run very far on level ground. And so, you know, this is not an easy, you can put little inverted swells in between each lot, but where's it gonna go? It's gonna stay in the inverted swell until it gets into, if there's an inverted swell, ditch line on the road, until it evaporates or trickles off somewhere, but, so anyhow. My opinion is, I wanna do away with the classification. I wanna do 1.5 feet above the crown of the road. I think we need to address the issue for Gina, on Gina's behalf, to say, we need to work out a situation where we say, here's how you determine which part of the road you gotta use. I agree with that. I think we need to work that out. And I think that we ought to leave that to the builder to say, whoever's building the house or the homeowner, if they're building it, they on their letterhead say, I have shot the elevation of where the house is going and all of the surrounding crowns of the roads, and here's the highest spot. And I think we can handle it that way, and then she can check it with her laser when she goes out. So I think the only requirement that we need to do is 1.5 feet above the crown of the road, do away with the shaded decks. Cause there's just stuff in here it's just bureaucracy. By going up 1.5 feet, we have taken everybody essentially out
so
of.
let me just ask you, the shaded X, all of that is green, that's nothing more than 6 inches more than what we have. Cause that would all then become X. You think that's all that's necessary? And all of that green area is just,
Yeah, I do, because like I say, I mean, I'm not just guessing. I've rode around, Al, and I rode around everywhere. I've been in my business, I'm all over this city, all the time. I've been down every road, and I rode down all the roads that were the real issue during Sally, and made tabulations, and if we're 1.5 feet above, nobody's gonna have issues with flood. Unless it's some kind of, if we have another Michael and it sits here off the coast for a couple of days like they've done at Texas a couple of times, it don't matter what we do, everybody here is gonna be gone and underwater.
we're there now. We've been gone and underwater. We're trying to build back to what, in my, we wanna build something back that gives us not a Michael. We can't withstand a Michael. We know that. That's
Yeah, and I think that's what we're
But a
doing.
more moderate storm in our area on the coast, I am definitely against removing shaded X from the map and making it all X.
Well, I mean, we've already done that with 1.5 feet.
The main difference is regular X is 1 foot above the
No.
ground of the road, and shaded X is 18 inches.
No, and it's also.
So we've
recognized as a
gone
flood
6
area.
inches above, we've gone 6 inches above what's required here for the X.
That's why I think 2 feet is better. And I'll be quiet, cause y'all know, 2 feet for me, we need to just have a consensus so we can why don't we just decide different things? First of all, I guess we ought to back up, is there anybody else wants to do away with shaded X? Just just take all the green and make it this color, which is X.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it would do. I mean, that's what you would do. You would, if you remove the shaded X, that would, the 100-year floodplain doesn't recognize shaded X.
It was all X, right? I mean, I'm like, yeah, you're right, I mean, that's
It
why.
was all X.
And then you built.
And then FEMA came in and made the green, and we adopted that map as the shaded X area, which recognizes that it is a flood hazard area. And so if we, by classification, remove shaded X, everything green becomes that color right there.
And as far as the insurance company is concerned, it's all black anyhow. Because they don't recognize shaded X as being in a flood zone any more than they do X.
I don't.
No, I'm just thinking out loud. No, I just wanna make sure that we understood that's what happened.
In my opinion, which I got notes from all three of them here, that, what they want to do. And I don't know why Miss Sharon did yet, so. I think that's what we all need to say, but if it was, in my opinion, which is scary sometimes, if this was black, this was X before FEMA turned it to
Before the new map,
new map and turned it to shaded.
shaded X.
Now, with us, and this was a foot above, I'm talking about
Ground
the
level.
100 year. Now, we proposed, 18 inches.
Well, but Daryl's saying he wants to remove shaded X.
Well,
He wants to remove it.
I know I got him and Bob wants to keep shaded X, okay. But what I'm saying is, if we remove the shaded X, I'm trying to say what everybody says and get an opinion here, and put it 18 inches above, it was a foot. It used to be a foot with the 100-year plan. Now we are proposing 18 inches and you are 2 foot. Bobby sort of didn't care which way he went on the 18 inches or 2 foot. But if this was X and we raised 18 inches, then in my opinion, that would be enough to raise it up and to still get rid of the shaded X. Because we was a foot, so we raised it up 6 more inches.
So would you want all X's to be 18 inches instead of just shaded X? Because if we got rid of shaded X, they'd all be the same.
And
So then
I see what you're saying.
Changing all this then to 18 inches, it's been a foot. All that,
See, that's the hold back on me right there too, is the, if you change everything, I'd say it to get, but this was already a foot, I don't see why we couldn't keep it a foot, but that's when it gets.
well, if you change the classification, you can't have different, you'd have to go identify which lots then would be a foot. I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
it'd be pretty complicated.
Well, a compromise for that situation between your point and your point would be, the compromise would be 1.5 feet, because he's saying if it goes all back black, it was a foot, and everything stays a foot. You're saying everything should be 2 foot, so 1.5 feet is between.
Well, I don't think X should be any more than a foot above the crown of the road.
Yeah, but you're only talking 6 inches, so at 6 inches, I don't think it's gonna.
What you talking about changing the whole area? You talking about changing
See,
the whole area?
in my philosophy, I totally disagree that shaded X is not a flood hazard potential area. If you wanna do away with it,
It's addressed here, what they're talking about.
I just, my philosophy is that green area is a definite area that deserves more than this area, without question.
Well, I mean,
I don't know why we want to go back to what we had, I just.
Well, we're really going a 6
We're going 6 inches higher.
Well, yeah, you're changing that. You're not going back, you're changing
could we
the
not,
X.
could we not,
Zone.
all what's X now, and all
Well,
what's
that's what I'm-
shaded X, designate
I know,
the
this
previous
just gets
shaded
crazy.
X to be a
It's
foot
just
and a half.
more you sit here and think about. In my opinion, I don't wanna change the X, I think it should be a foot.
Well, we'll leave these people and keep the shade X, make it 1.5 feet. they're a lot better off than what they were in the 500-year plan. These people don't deserve having to be changed.
And I agree with that, Mark, I promise you, I do agree with that, but I don't think I'm getting my point across, which is, I don't understand the damn self. But I don't think we should mess with eggs. But the shaded eggs, I believe it needs to be a foot and a half. And then I don't know if we really need to keep shaded eggs. That's what I'm torn between. If you're gonna raise it a foot and a half,
But the thing about it, if you take this and make that shaded X into an X, and if you make it a foot and a half, these people over here are gonna have to go up.
it's just 6 inches.
That's why.
Well, out,
Yeah,
6 inches
that-
off from us, but we sitting there.
Well, I'm trying to protect everybody in the city, and not just, okay, this person wants to build here, so these people ought to be penalized. I'm shaded, the shaded X is gonna give people a break from the 500-year plan to the 100-year plan, but it's gonna help protect the people that was in that zone to start with. That's why I say we need to keep the shaded X in there. It's trying to work for the whole city is what I'm trying to do.
And who determined what was shaded X?
People.
This is the latest map with Athens.
Okay.
They use the term every 10 to 12 years, they supposedly come through and reevaluate your city with a map. Michael, we knew we were on the list to get an updated map. We didn't have it at the time, but it came out, 6, 8 months after Michael, give or take. And this is the latest version of the FEMA flood map based on their criteria. And it's just a model. It's not an exact science. But in this case, I think it's very representative of our community, given the amount of water that's surrounding us.
And there's not a lot of damaged houses still in the X area, are there? I mean, how much stuff needs to be rebuilt in the X? Relatively, there's not, Gina, do you know that? There's not a ton of stuff to be rebuilt, it's not already being rebuilt or been rebuilt in the X, cause it wasn't damaged that much, right?
Yeah, there's still a lot.
Oh, no, there's
There's
a
still
lot of
a lot
vacant
there.
lots,
Yeah, but,
things like that. I hear a couple of things going on. First off, we're talking about changing the map. We're not changing the map. That's a FEMA map. It stays the way it is. So that map will not change no matter what decision you guys make. Second thing is, this ordinance that Nick's put together has eliminated the elevation, or that Nick has marked up, that we've all marked up, has eliminated the elevation requirements for the shaded X flood zone. But it keeps the designation of the shaded X as a flood zone in the city of Mexico Beach. So, but it also writes into the LDR the new elevation requirements of the shaded X, which is a foot and a half above the crown of the road. So, we currently still have the designation of the shaded X as a flood zone in Mexico Beach. If you eliminate the shaded X from the floodplain ordinance completely, then you eliminate it from your floodplain. It's no longer a flood zone in Mexico Beach. So all of the stuff that you like, Daryl, about it goes away. All the stuff that you don't like goes away. It all goes away. And that can be done without affecting X. Because the elevation requirements are already written into the LDR.
Okay, so what you just said, let me make sure I understand what I think you just said. We could leave the designation of shaded X, because FEMA made this map, and we're not gonna change their map.
You're not gonna change it.
We just use that shaded.
We use that
As a graphic.
We don't have to use it, but we use it. The map's the map.
Now, so, we could go in and say, okay, we have a clear determination of what's shaded X and what's X right now. Why can't we just say that we're not gonna do anything in the shaded X except for we change the elevation to a foot and a half above the ground of the road. Can we not do that?
You can eliminate the shaded X from your floodplain ordinance completely,
As far as a classification?
as far as the classification.
It's still, we're still gonna have a map, people can
Still
come
gonna
by there and they can say, I'm in this green area right here, so my elevation's gotta be a foot and a half above the road.
Yes,
And anybody, and they see the black and they say, my elevation's a foot above the road.
yes.
And we can handle the height issue through a different kind of situation, according to what Nick says later, that would give those people the ability to build a 500-year,
The top of the building.
the top of the building, not the bottom, right? And handle that.
Yes.
That's perfect for me. I'm happy. Can we vote on it, go home?
No,
That-
because,
There's more to it than that. You missed the part that
You-
or
you-
by either choice, what she said, that you're
Or-
also gonna lose, go ahead, say that part
you're
again.
gonna lose the fill requirements
Right,
that are stormwater related, that are very important.
okay.
You're gonna lose the breakaway walls, which are very important, particularly on the south side of 98.
But now, wait a minute, if the breakaway walls, those are wave related, breakaway walls, right? Now, in those areas where you're gonna have wave related stuff, aren't they under a different classification anyhow?
Your V zone is and your coastal A zones, but if you look at that map, there's a lot of stuff on the south side of 98 that is not in an A zone or a V zone,
So,
that was hit by a significant wave action.
okay. Well, I think, you know, as well as you just know, because you said that was my thoughts. My first thoughts were keep the fill, keep the breakaway walls for anything south of Highway 98. That takes care of anybody that's gonna have wave issues. Because wave issues are not gonna get way over here. If they
You
did,
got my house, you got my house.
Yeah, I think, never mind, I'm gonna just let you go with it. Go ahead. Excuse me for interrupting.
okay,
Would we be penalized in any way from FEMA receiving funds if we do not go by the X and the shaded X and this map that they made after Mike?
In the conference call that we had, they said no. We suggested that we write a letter to them to get that in writing. That letter was sent to them on the 1st of October. I talked to Lita on Friday, and she said she is still waiting a response from everyone else. Doesn't mean that it has changed, it's just,
they haven't sent it.
they haven't sent it back to us. But
I think that's
from the
important.
conversation that we've had so far, they're saying the answer is it will not change if we go from the 500 to the 100.
I'm talking about changing the shaded X and the X, and all, that FEMA made this map, saying that was shaded X.
Talking about going from 500 to 100. The map, I don't know, has anything to do with that.
Okay,
We asked going from 500 to 100 if it would have a change.
Different ways to say the same thing.
okay.
Shaded X is 500, X is 100.
What he said in that conversation was, they would not fund any building, municipal, like fire, rescue, any of those kinds of emergency type buildings, if we put them in a 500-year floodplain. And I said, that's not a problem, because we've already designated them an X area to build those kinds of things in. So he said, we won't lose any funding. If in fact that's how they come back with their letter. But he was not a guy that struck you as need to go ask anybody else. He was pretty adamant about it, and it was pretty straightforward. As a matter of fact, he clarified it for us 2 or 3 times. So, I don't imagine it's gonna happen, that they're gonna say. So where are we now?
Well, if we're gonna do away with the shaded X category, not the map, you're right, but then that's gonna change, that's gonna create my thought was we were coming here to keep it as simple as we could. Removing the shaded X out of this flood ordinance changes an awful lot of things that I would hope we all would think would be important. To just change to recognize it as a designated area and put a footage above the crown of the road is a rather simple change for our people. It's a simple change for the administration. It is definitely a win-win for those that are building in terms of height elevation financially. But it still recognizes that there are things in the shaded X that have to be done that Gina just referenced to. And it seems the simplest path to me. And then just define what it is that we want, just make sure that the definition of the crown of the road is a defined, it's clear. Not by a contractor, I hope. On any kind of letterhead, on any kind of contractor, but by our building department. And other than that, I'm good. I think I think what we voted on back in September to get rid of the 500-year, it's just that it's gonna take a while. That's still gotta go to the state. And it's not like at next Tuesday's meeting, hopefully we can vote to ratify and have Nick from this meeting give some direction on what it is that he'll come back with in this, or what we say that'll get changed or altered or edited or whatever from what we have now, and let's move on. But if we want to change that category, that's going to require a significant amount of alterations in this.
It'll take some editing. We can do it. It won't be drastic. It'll change the definitions. It'll change.
But it'll change.
But it'll change the impact.
It'll change the impact of these folks that are building.
Yes.
And to me, they won't be, that they'll be we'll be going backwards for a coastal community that's experienced what we've experienced to just simply go back to what we had. That's what we'll do. We'll just go back to what we had.
Well, not truly going back to what we had.
Well, 6 inches above the crown ceiling. All that other stuff
Foot and a
gone.
half above the crown.
When we read it.
All that other stuff gone.
When we agreed the last meeting, not last meeting, whenever we talked about this, I went to, going back to the 100-year plan, keeping the shaded X, 1.5 feet. I thought that was a good, simple way to do it. It's helping the people out. And the more we argue about changing this, from what we already agreed to change to, the longer it's gonna take to get it done. And I think we need to get something done on it. So I'm going back to the 100-year plan, keeping the shade X, 1.5 feet.
All right? What does everybody else think about that?
One more question, and then I'm sort of halfway, I'm like Bobby, and I'm like you, and I think we need to go, but I sure want to make sure we do this right for these people. And Nick, you said something, that if we did go way down talking about going, it would take a few more days, but we could do it.
Start making the changes in
Yes.
the writing? Yeah, we can make that work. We know how to run it.
I know the impact, I know what it do, but it could be done. Truthfully, I mean, that's what you said.
Yes, it'd still go through state review and it would still have some steps, but we can write it that way.
Mama said it'd be days.
Well, the impact is much, much more important to me than it is the number of days it takes to fix it. I can tell
And I agree with
Going
that.
back to what we had, Darryl, we can argue this, but we are going back to exactly what we had, except for adding 6 inches to the elevation. That's, everything else, we're removing everything that Gina talked about in the requirements for the construction of the homes. And I just can't imagine that, I'm not interested in going back to what we had. I'm not doing that. I mean, that's, I'm sorry, but that is exactly what we're doing there. We're going back to what we had, plus 6 inches. That's all we're doing.
You know, my first plan after I talked with Gina that last time was, okay, and I talked to a couple of engineers and other people, and there was stuff in here that we definitely should keep, like breakaway walls, like the 1 foot of fill. I think those are good. But the rest of the stuff is just over government. So for me, the perfect way to do it is to say everything south of Highway 98, if they build on pilings, they have to have breakaway walls. Everything else, if we keep it, if we use this map, everybody in the green knows they gotta go 1.5 feet above the road, everybody in black knows they gotta go 1 foot above the road. And any of those houses can only put 1 foot fill. That, to me, is a simple way to get the good part of this classification and get rid of the needless part of this classification. And again, to do the best job to protect the citizens without overreach, I think that's, to me, that's a perfect way to do it. Do you know of any places really that come to mind outside of the south of Highway 98 that would have wave issues?
I can't answer that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said you had wave issues.
I had 6 foot of water go through my house.
Yeah, but was
That's
that?
a wave issue. I'm sorry. Now, whatever we do, we need to make this last. We don't need to keep these citizens bouncing back and forth or whatever. But yes, I seen the destruction. I lived through it.
I was here about it.
I want the people to build as fast as they can, but I want to be safely too. So I'm giving a lot to what we was talking about. Shaded X, 1.5 feet, 100-year plan, good, let's do it. But let's get it where these citizens can start building and get everything going. And not going from one town to another, to one change to another. Let's make it final, flat, and get it over with.
How many do we have that agree that, I mean, is there some of us here that are thinking that we're good with what Bobby just said, 100-year, 1.5 feet? Keep the map, keep the designations, I mean, that's pretty simple. I'm good with that, that's just simple, I like simple, and I don't like south side of the road, north side of the road, I mean, there's water, there's potential. I like it the way Bobby said it. I'm good with that. Anybody else?
I like both of them. I like the way Dale said it too, and I understand Bobby. But what did you, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
When Dale said what he wanted, what didn't you like?
I don't like south side of the road, north side of the road. I don't like trying to write in, pick out the areas like, he said, on the south side of the road, if you build up so high, you've gotta have breakaway walls. I don't like that, because there's areas, in my opinion, that are not on the south side of the road, in some of the low-lying areas that are still shaded X that need to do that. That need to do that. I don't know why we won't start breaking our town up, because I don't see it as a north and south issue. When you look at all that water and the potential that what happened,
Where's your house right
it's simple.
I say, I see, But I can see what he said, and I can see what you,
Well, I
I think
just
both
don't-
of them, you know, he wants the water side. with the-
Yeah, well, there's,
And then you want everything.
I'm just,
right
looking-
now.
I'm looking at what I think is best for everything.
Okay, I can't see the road.
That's 29, 26, 17, 15.
No, no, okay.
There's 19, you're at 15 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
yeah.
Get over here, Miss Sharon.
It's hard to see upside down.
Yeah, it ain't that hard to see.
Don't look.
That's Bobby's
That's
house.
what my house was
You're in the black?
there. No, I'm a shade X now.
Nice.
So you're just outside that little black area
Yeah.
right there.
Now, what is the blue area? What is that for?
I can tell you, if you look at his Michelle, see, that's.
That's a, what is the blue area?
AE.
AE.
A,
That's blue.
AE?
A is wet, AE and AO is wet, and then the green is shaded it, and this is it.
Okay.
See, this is what I live.
I'm not there.
well, I was out there, what you been wanting, pretty well getting most of it.
Used to be eight before this.
Okay.
It's, you know, I'm just,
But if I keep pushing this on and on, we're just.
no, I don't
keep
want it,
going.
no, I want it to be over. I'm with you, Bobby, I do. I want it to be over. There's people waiting right now.
Yeah, we need to decide something.
Yeah.
I think the simplest way is gonna be the best way, to simplify this thing, and I'm gonna have to agree with, well, I understand what you said, Bobby, and that sounds the simplest to me. But then I see what Daryl says, but I don't know what all would change if we changed it, all of the shaded X to X. That's what I don't know, exactly what would change.
It would change a lot of the elevation. Well, what I'm worried about sometimes too, on people just going back and building whatever, is what happens to the neighbor.
Right.
If we keep it uniform in the area, it's gonna be a, you know, we had, there's just several places I can show you now, where people build up in their area and just flooded up the neighbor.
Yep.
So, this, to me, it's just, this thing is pretty simple. That's the reason I agreed with the last time we all was talking about it. First off, I wouldn't, because of what happened to me, I think, well, maybe we need to stay at 500. But I understand people build. I was able to rebuild mine because I had insurance, so a lot of people put that. I understand that. So I say, okay, let's go back to the 100-year plan. But let's keep it a little safer here. Let's make sure we got the right elevation certificates or whatever. Don't penalize people in the X zone by changing the elevation. If we keep it like, as we agreed to go with the 100-year plan, keeping shaded S, foot and a half, everything else basically is gonna be the same. People in the AE gonna have to build up their heights and all that kind of stuff. The coastal line's gonna have to do exactly what it's supposed to do through the coastal construction line. You know, and we can get this done, we can get it written up, we can get down to Florida, and we can get these people where they build. But we gotta, you go through all this, we gotta get through the state of Florida
Right.
to be able to get back. And the more we, you know, push this to that, it'll be fine, as long as it's gonna take.
Okay, so in essence, if I compromise, I'm assuming, and leave these 2 or 3 things in here that are just useless, bureaucracy as I called it, because I'm for breakaway walls,
Well, now,
and,
the one down there inside the coastal line is gonna have to have a breakaway wall.
sure, and the ones in A and E.
It's
they have to have-
nothing we can say
I
about
understand
that.
that, I understand that, but if, as long as everything green. All right, really simple. If somebody goes in their builder or the owner and goes in and they look at this map and they go, okay, so if I'm in any of these black areas, my elevation is gonna be a foot above the road. That's simple, right?
That's a 100-year plan.
That's a 100-year plan. If I'm in any of these green areas, I'm a foot and a half above the crown of the road, and we've got to designate for her in the paperwork somehow where she knows that they give us a letter and say, I've shot the grades, here's the highest part of the road.
Is, what would,
And
the
that needs to be
world or
verified.
the highest grade, joiner, is that what you put?
We need to put whatever it is, whatever y'all want it to be.
Yeah, but isn't that what this was saying in there? Isn't that what it said?
For X and for shaded X, what we're looking at right now involves crown of the road or curve.
Just so the crown of the road is defined where it's shot from, and the building department is the responsible party for
Verifying.
verifying.
Right, I agree with that. So foot and a half, if you're in green, foot and a half above, verified by the building department, and the owner or the builder, contractor, whoever is still gonna shoot it and say, here's what.
We don't care, well,
And it don't matter.
we don't care, they can shoot it any time.
But they have to verify, it. And in order for you to verify it before they start, we gotta change something, right? Or you've gotta change something, you gotta do an inspection prior to, that you haven't been doing.
Yeah, if we want to verify elevation and setbacks, I mean, that's kind of a different issue, we can discuss that, how we wanna do that, but yeah, it'll
But we can
require,
make that happen,
yeah. if we
okay,
can-
outside of this discussion.
Absolutely.
And we can make that happen, okay, so then, even though it's got a couple of things in there that I think we should take out, I'm happy with saying, let's don't take them out, as long as we're a foot and a half above, we've gone plenty high enough to save people from a Sally type event. And the X is easy to understand, look on the map, if it's black, foot above, green, foot and a half above, to the highest part of the crown, and then the classification stays. Is that what you're saying, Bob?
Yeah, pretty much. So
And that's
all you
what I-
have to do is touch up a little bit of stuff, what you said about at the first
The
meeting.
first definition.
We can have this ready to vote for.
So we got two issues. The issue with her verifying, which she says she can handle pretty easily. I don't know if she has to get with you.
We're already adding language about how much height above crown of the road, we can tweak the wording there to just say it needs to be verified by city building department.
Okay.
city staff. We-
And then you can also fix the height issue.
For the top of the building?
For if somebody wants to build to 500, if they're in here to match up and get that height, we can handle that through.
We'll work on
now
this, that's not part of the floodplain ordinance.
I know, but that handles his question about it while we had that discussion. I'm just trying to say that we can finalize that too.
We should be able to get that done quicker, even though we
Yeah.
haven't drafted a single word.
Because we don't have to go through the state for that, or we do have to go
We
through.
do not.
Okay, so we can handle it.
This
Then I'm,
is the flood, it's gotta go through the state.
then I'm fine with that. We keep the classification, we drop anything on green, foot and a half above the crown of the road to be verified by the inspection department, anything in black, foot above the road. That way people can walk in, they don't have to even get into this. They can look at this map and go, here I am right here, foot and a half above the road. Makes it easier.
We can get it written up, get it going to the state.
Now, does that mean that they're still gonna have to go get a survey and they're gonna still have to get a benchmark? So,
Which I really think that's,
They need to do that.
to me, that gets her out of a bind, the builder out of a bind, and put it on that survey and say, you gotta be this elevation shot.
okay.
And it's not that much money.
I don't think so.
They just run 3 or 4 miles.
Not compared to building a $500,000 house.
So, back to you, do we have consensus, Al?
I don't know, I'm waiting. Sharon, are you good with that?
I'm good with what Bobby said.
Okay,
and What
good.
Daryl just said,
Good.
basically the same thing, I
I
believe.
think they did.
They do.
Okay.
I don't know,
I don't
I'm good,
know.
I'm making, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Nick, what you've marked up is
What we're
what
gonna
we've
do.
done.
Very, very
Yeah.
close.
I mean, we're almost,
There's a couple things you gotta take out.
okay, so we're not changing the requirement for the elevation certificate. I will make, cause that, to me, that's, okay.
We're not changing the Oh, yeah.
the requirement,
Well, this is pretty much.
with the elevation
Yeah,
certificate, we
but-
need that.
Yeah, I do, I really think.
Okay.
I-
Alright, so I'm good, I'm not even gonna try to paraphrase, I don't need to, I know what to say.
I
Okay,
do.
all right.
So, Nick, you got, we're sending that to you,
I think,
and you're good, and we can have it ready for next Tuesday.
yes.
All right, can I add one more thing quick?
Sure.
Darn, I just forgot it. It's really an important thing.
I know it was.
No, it really was.
Bang.
How to do you, man? Oh, God, it was an important thing. And it was a simple one to change anything.
You know,
All right, never mind.
that happens,
Sorry.
You just keep
I'm
that.
getting there too, but
Okay, we done? Last.
Oh, I know what it was.
Alright, good.
We got people waiting. Literally got a guy, stopped his work at a foundational level. I talked with you outside about it not long ago. Is there any way that we can give them an okay to go ahead? Because we know what we're gonna do. We're not doing anything that the state's probably gonna turn down, right? Because we're not really changing anything, except the elevation. And they already told us we can change the 500-year, and it has nothing to do with them. They're not gonna have any issue with it. The floodplain manager lady told us that on the phone, with you and me and Dick.
I don't expect problems, but until they've really done their review,
So we should tell those people what?
When it's changed, it's changed. There is no option there, for me. Now, legally, from representing this city, till it's changed, anything we do, we open a can of worms.
Okay, so how long do you think it's gonna take? What do I need to tell these people?
Expedite it as quick as if we
Yeah.
can, as quickly as we can, what would you?
How many times do we have to meet again to make it happen?
Special.
we
Just
will have
the
a
once?
first reading, a second reading, planning and zoning will look at it, they can look at it any time in that period, and we could do that concurrently with our first reading.
Can we consolidate those into a week or two rather than 2 to 3 months?
It's black and white state law. That doesn't say 2 or 3 months, but it'll take a month.
Okay, so we could probably tell these people, go ahead and
No,
More than-
no, we've gotta get the state review first, and if we're lucky, maybe that takes a week, but they say sometimes it takes 6 weeks, so I don't know how long it'll take.
So we do our reading before it goes to the state.
No, we're gonna send it to the state first, to make sure we're not
Okay.
working on adopting something that the state tells us is
But
illegal.
we'll see that next Tuesday, correct?
The version.
The version that we're gonna send,
It'll look almost just like what you got.
I know it will, but it won't be marked up, it'll be what we're gonna send. Don't we have to say we need to vote to send that to the state officially? Have we done that?
You don't necessarily need to.
Okay.
What you really need to do is.
Good.
You need to vote on your first or second readings,
Okay,
but we would want someone who thinks, no, that's not what we intended, that's not what we said, the opportunity to say, wait, there's a problem here, this sentence is wrong.
alright, so what are we getting next Tuesday?
The finalized version of what you got today.
Okay.
And
Then it goes, will it have already gone to the state, or we will see it in our packet for review? Is that what, I'm trying to make sure I understand what we're gonna see.
What we're talking about is, you'll see it one more time before we send it to the state. We'll send it to the state that day, after that meeting.
After that meeting,